Hello, everyone. This is TsaphahYahu. A lot of you know me from Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. I'm not going to say too much about myself because I don't want this video to get too long. I want to get right into it, and I don't like long YouTube videos. People send me videos all the time. If it's not under 2 minutes, I'm not watching it. But so I've been studying yoga myself through literature for the last 3 years. I've studied the various texts and the Yoga Sutras themselves on Indian spirituality and other different things. And there were some things I really liked about it and some things I learned that most people wouldn't know, I don't think. There's a lot of discrepancies about Indian spirituality, quote unquote spirituality, and also about yoga in general. It was interesting to me to read about yoga and study Indian spirituality for about 3 years, and then to kind of poke my head out to see what was going on and who was practicing yoga postures, which is asanas and whatnot. I started to see different accounts, and I was like taken aback at how different it seemed in the text and how it seemed when I was living in California, where everyone's got a dog and a yoga mat. What you see on Instagram, what you see on social media, that's not necessarily yoga. And the way people talk about it, that's not necessarily yoga. Now, who am I to say what yoga is or isn't? But I'll say from the most ancient perspective that we have, which is the written Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and also the various texts like the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Rig Veda and whatnot, all these different texts that we have to look at, the Dhammapada. We can look at these texts and kind of gauge like what yoga is about. It's not the same as what you're seeing, what you're used to seeing. There's a lot of discrepancies. There's a lot of misinformation going out about yoga. So I decided when I started practicing yoga postures that I was going to talk about like what yoga is from a more ancient perspective, if we can say that. So I put a series of posts out called "What is Yoga?" and I got a lot of feedback. I got more messages on my social media in that day than I ever have for any post. To this day, I think it's the most comments I've ever gotten. Negativity spreads faster than positivity. Usually I'm just talking pretty positive online, and not too many people have too much to say about that. It's not until they disagree that people come out of the woodworks, and that's fine. Dialogue is good as long as dialogue is respectful. But yeah, I got a lot of messages saying yoga's evil. Watch out for yourself. You're going to be opening yourself up for spirits and this and that and this and that and that and this. And I took it in stride, and no love lost to anybody who felt that way, who blocked me and who unfriended me and whatnot. It's still all love. But I was sent a video by someone who actually was concerned, and they said, "Hey man, watch this video so you can know what you're getting into before you get into it." And I watched a couple of minutes of it, and then I turned it off because I kind of figured where it was going. And I didn't reply to the person or whatnot. I just kept him. I said thank you, and I just kept it moving. But the video is called "The Truth About Yoga" by a group, I think, that's called Truth Unedited. Yes, Truth Unedited is right there at the bottom. And they put this video out a while ago. It looks like November 2018, right around the time I made a series of posts called "What is Yoga?" And so I got the video, and I decided, hey, look, I'll just, I watched it again today because someone else sent it to me again. And I was like, look, I gave it another 3 or so minutes on my lunch break. But then I stopped it and said, you know what? When I get home, I'm just going to go through the video on a video and just basically talk about why I feel this video is very misinformed. It's not a knock against the individual. I'm not going to be going into the doctrine, which I believe these brothers are. This brother who is talking, at least, is a Christian. They might be a Christian group. No disrespect to anybody's religion or anybody's faith base. God forbid that I would do that. But I do want to talk about the facts as they're being presented, to see if we could tell a different side of the story so people can make a better judgment. I think the book of Proverbs says, he who answers a matter before hearing both sides, it is folly to him. Or I might be paraphrasing. But I just want to present the other side, another side of the story. I just want to present another side of the story so that people can get a better understanding, a more full understanding of what yoga is, of what Hinduism is as well, so that they can make a informed decision on whether yoga, asanas, and yoga period is something that they might want to apply to their life. So we're just going to go through the video and talk about these different points. So here we go. TruthUnedited.com.
With the recent shooting that just happened in Florida in the yoga studio, while I researched it, I came across many things in reference to Christian yoga.
Okay, so first, let me start off by saying this. I have a background in marketing. The first thing I notice when I turn this video on is the music. The music is eerie, so it seems like it's kind of setting a tone. It's playing on your senses already. It's got an eerie tone to it to kind of show you that what you're about to see is that yoga is evil. It's setting the tone. It's, we use it in marketing all the time, a play on the senses, whether it be sight or whether it be sound. And they're coming up with things that can deal with the scent as well through your computer, through your video game systems, and even through your theater. So they're trying to engage all the systems, all of the senses in marketing right now. But here we have a video that starts off with eerie music that's saying we're going to expose yoga, that yoga is evil. So I want you to note that whenever you watch any videos like this, that start to say that you don't let it persuade you by the various music and the tone of the voice or whatever it is, that you don't let that sway you, that you just take the facts for the facts. So I just want to set the tone by saying that. I also want to say that this gentleman heard about a shooting at a yoga studio and decided to look yoga up really quick. It doesn't seem like he did that much research on it, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll get into some things and maybe he knows what he's talking about. Let's go.
I've also had a few people come to me with questions about yoga and if it is okay for believers in Yahshua to partake in it. The question is always, should Christians do yoga? There's a growing consensus today that yoga is all right for Christians. Christians are believers who are saved through the faith in Yahshua. However, I do not call myself a Christian because this is a label the world has placed on us when they decided to persecute and kill us.
I want you to take real close note to what he just said. He said, I don't call myself a Christian because this is a label that was thrust upon us. Take a good note of that because I'm going to come back to that statement when we start getting into this. We're going to return to what he just said.
So I'm a Christian according to the way the world would label me, but I prefer to use the Hebrew term kodeshim, meaning set apart ones. We are set apart from the world, being led by the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. But I will use the label of Christian in the video to make it easier for those who do not have this full understanding to follow. So like I was saying, there's a growing consensus today that it is alright for Christians to engage in the practice of yoga, even if it is just for exercise. There is even a movement going around named Christian yoga or yoga for Christians. There are churches that embrace it and even provide yoga classes for their congregation.
I want you to also take note of this Christians making up Christian yoga. Take note of this because we're going to return to this concept of religious groups taking yoga and adapting it to their religious paradigm.
Many feel it's okay because they play gospel music or scriptures with their exercise.
I can't listen to gospel music. That's just me.
That come with yoga. But like with many things, the problem starts with a general lack of education.
He just said the problem comes from a general lack of education on the subject. Again, take serious note of this as we go forward.
The subject. People just see the word yoga, then they link it with exercise. And from that general way of thinking, there is no further analysis or thought on what yoga actually is and where it came from. It again is the same problem that we face with most things. We are highly uneducated on most of the things that we do and partake in. The thing is, if ignorance was a...
So before we go on, he talks about yoga. Yoga is not simply an exercise. He's right about that. What people call yoga is actually the word asanas, which means like posture. In the Yoga Sutras, which is like the Bible of yoga, so to speak. The Yoga Sutras is a kind of the only text we really have, the only old ancient text we really have that actually talks about and breaks down and codifies what yoga is into a quasi system. It's not even a whole system in itself, because a lot of the information within the Yoga Sutra is based on you having prior knowledge of what's going on in India at that time. So it's really hard to read the Yoga Sutras as a book. You have to have prior knowledge of the history of yoga. I mean, not of yoga, but of the history of the Indian thought process, or the Indian quote unquote spirituality. There's a reason I put spirituality in quotes. But yeah, so yoga, what people call yoga is actually asanas. It means postures. Out of the many verses in the Yoga Sutras, there is only one line, one verse that even references asanas. So people have made a whole movement on a fraction of what yoga is about. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. But this is an overview. Hopefully that from here, people can take some of these things that are talked about and research it for themselves, and not take my word or his word or anyone's word for it, because that's how I do things. Let's go.
Valid excuse on our day of judgment, then I would not be making this video. And there are also a lot of people that like to say that the grace that Elohim has given us shouldn't make us think about these type of things.
Now, here, one thing real quick is I respect him. I respect that he thinks that people's lives are at stake when they practice yoga. So this is why he made this video. So he made this video, it seems to me, from what I'm getting, out of love for the people, not just to bash yoga. So for that, my hat's off to him. So again, it's not about bashing him. It's not about bashing Christianity. It's just about getting some facts straight so that we can go forward.
Basically, because we are saved because of our belief in Yahshua, then we shouldn't have to worry about trivial things like yoga. This is also a false understanding. Grace does not allow us to play with wickedness. This is why we are quote Hashem. We are set apart. Now, before we get into what yoga is, let's get into scripture. Yoga is obviously not discussed in scripture, but what is spoken of is plenty of instruction we are given for living our lives. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, we see the first commandment: you shall have no other gods before me. When Yahshua overcame Satan in the wilderness, he said in Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship Yahweh your Elohim, and him only you shall serve. I show these first scriptures because it will soon be proven to you that when practicing yoga, you are putting other gods before Yahweh. Scripture has also prophesied that this kind of thing will be a problem during the last days. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 says, now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. So what I will explain is why this correlates with other gods and spirits and doctrines of demons.
Okay, I'm gonna ignore like the Christian doctrine stuff again. This is neither the time or place for that. Yeah, I'm not gonna go in too much into that because we'd be here all day. I don't really like to disagree with people's doctrines or their beliefs. Usually when you're dealing with another individual, you want to kind of deal with facts and things that are testable and provable and practical. So I'm not gonna get into like the Christian doctrine part of it, but obviously he geared this towards his Christian brothers, so have at it.
Like I said, with many traditions that we practice today, the answer becomes much clearer if we just educate ourselves on the background and history of things.
Again, he is bringing up education and educating ourselves on the background and history of things. This is very ironic.
So let's take a look at what yoga is. First thing to know about yoga is that it comes from Hinduism.
Now, here is where a lot of people go wrong. So I'm not knocking him, but here's where most people go wrong. Yoga comes from Hinduism. Remember, I told you to remember what I said about, the title Christian, because now this is where it comes to play. Hindu comes from the word Sidhu, which means river, and was not a religious group name. It actually was like a geographical name for a group of people who lived in a certain geographical place, usually beyond the Indus River and whatnot, if I'm not mistaken. So this word Hindu comes from really, I think, Persian. The Persians called this place Hindustan, and they called the people who were in it Hindus. But again, it was a title that was given to them by outsiders first to describe the geography of the piece of this piece of land. You know what I mean? But why is that important? It's like because the people living in the land didn't call themselves Hindus. They called themselves other names, like they would call themselves the people of the Vedas, the Vedas being like their spiritual book, or they call themselves those who revere the Brahmins. And the word Brahmin in this instinct was like the priest or holy men. So it's those who respect the holy men. They also called themselves like Bengali Vaishnavas, which is like worshippers of Vishnu living in Bengal. This is another name they would have called themselves. Again, Hindu is not a religion. Hinduism is not a religion. It is actually a word that was first used. They called people Hindus. It was first used, and it meant like someone who was not Muslim, Jewish, or Christian, aka not Western, so to speak. They were Far Eastern. They created this title generally because of marriage laws, because different groups had different laws about getting married. And the time that this word Hindu and Hinduism came about, there were Jews, Christians, and Muslims living in these parts. And certain different groups did not believe in intermarrying. And they had other laws on marriage. Jews had laws, Christians had laws, Muslims had laws. So for the court system that was running the area at the time, they had to come up with a name for this group or these groups of people. There's so many different groups of quote unquote Hindus. And there's so many different types of quote unquote Hindu religions. And so they had to come up with a name for this group. So they used this word Hindu, and it just meant not Christian, not Muslim, not Jewish, because the people that were living in this region did not identify themselves according to their religious beliefs or religious practices. There were certain things that all of them shared, or for the most part, it's even hard to say that. For the most part, a lot of them shared belief in like reincarnation, belief in nonviolence, and things of this nature. A lot of them were vegetarian, but not all of them were vegetarian. Some of them worshipped cows. Some of them did not think the cow sacred and ate cow meat. Some of them, the horse was an abominable thing, and the dog was abominable, and these things were abominable the same way that a pig is abominable to like a Muslim and a Jew. So there's some things they had in common, and there's some things that threaded them. But beyond that, there's so many different types of groups that are out there. And if you talk to a Hindu today, you'll get 50 different answers on what Hinduism is. What people don't realize is that Indian spirituality, when we trace it back to some of the oldest texts being the Rig Veda, but the Upanishads is what I'm focusing on. The Upanishads is a group of scriptures that were written in a certain period. And these group of texts, the earlier Upanishadic texts, allude to the fact that there was a monotheistic belief system at play, a belief in one God. This God was called Brahman, loosely translated as Godhead, like the one who created everything. And you were a soul, an Atman, having a piece of God inside of you, similar to the way Genesis chapter 2 says that man was made in the image and likeness of God. It might be Genesis chapter 1. Yes, Genesis chapter 1. Man was made in the image and likeness of God. So they too believed this, and they called this image of God Atman. And they called God himself the Godhead. They called it Brahman, which is like saying a Godhead or a great spirit, so to speak. So what people don't realize that Hinduism, from its earliest standpoint, was monotheistic, and there was in the Upanishadic text a lot of disapproval of the rituals that were going on in the different Indian spiritualities now commonly called Hinduism, but it's really Indian quote unquote spirituality. Hindu is not a name of a religion at all. It became a name of a religion around the time that the Brits took over India, and maybe a little bit time before that, they adopted this name for themselves. That's why you see that the language is Hindi and whatnot now. But this is the name of a people, not the name of a religion. There was no central, there is no, Judaism is founded by like Moses, they believe. And there's a law of God. Christianity is found by Jesus, and there is the teachings that he handed down. But there is no there's no central character in Hinduism. You won't find it. Why is that? There is no central text in Hinduism. You won't find it. Why is that? Because Hinduism is not a religion. Okay. It was a geographical area that some people lived in, so they were called Hindus. Allah, if you lived in India, they called you Indian. If you lived in America, they called you Americans. But we are made up of many different peoples with many different religious backgrounds and beliefs. Even Christianity has a lot of different denominations. You have people who believe that Christ is God in the flesh. You have people who believe that he was a prophet. You have people who believe he was born of a virgin. You have people that believe he's a man. There's many different types of Christianity within Christianity, and Christianity is relatively young. So imagine what happened to this Hinduism or this Indian spirituality, as it is much older than a lot of these religions out here. But I don't want to go in too much of that. I just wanted to let you know that Hindu is this made up type of name that outsiders gave something that they could not understand.
Hinduism is an Eastern religion rooted in the occult, centered on themes of self-realization and actualization. There is a saying, there is no yoga without Hinduism, and no Hinduism without yoga.
Now, there's a saying that there is no yoga without Hinduism and no Hinduism without yoga. I think I know who he's saying is saying this, but I would like to know where he's getting this quote from and who's saying it, because he's just throwing it out there and he's not really telling you who's coming up with this quote. But I'm going to tell you this does go around by the Hindu type of fanatic. So there's some people who are fanatical about their religion. There's also a group of people who were so upset that yoga got hijacked by the West that they started to say these things. What they're really saying when they say there's no yoga without Hinduism and no Hinduism without yoga is they're trying to let you know that yoga is a Eastern practice. Yoga comes from Indian spirituality. So you can't hijack yoga postures without fully embodying what it means to be a yogi, which is nonviolence. Which is nonviolence, which is cleanliness, which is right thought, right actions. There's not many commandments in the Yoga Sutras, but there are what they call observances and abstentions in yoga, and there's about 10 of them. 10 abstentions and observances, things that you do, things that you don't do. I talked about them on my Instagram. If you want to look at the 8 limbs of yoga, you can see that there is a loose kind of code to being a yogi. This is not the same as Hinduism or Indian religions, because yoga is not a religion. It is a science. When I say that I'm a Hebrew yogi, it's like saying I'm a Hebrew mathematician. It's like saying I'm a Hebrew chemist, because yoga is a science, the scientific experiments of how to experience the soul within man. So I just wanted to touch on that again. The people who say there is no yoga without Hinduism, there's no Hinduism without yoga, are just frustrated that yoga has been hijacked by the West. The same way when I was in Israel, if I talk to a Jew in Israel, they say, what they're doing in the West is not Judaism. It's been hijacked. If I talk to a Muslim in Palestine, when I was in Palestine, they would say the Islam that they do in the West is not true Islam, because it's been hijacked from the East and people have westernized it. Usually when things get westernized, the substance of the thing is lost and the form of the thing is kept. If you talk to a Christian, which is like the Ebionites and the Nazarites of old, they would definitely look at Christianity today and say that is not true Christianity, because the Eastern substance has been lost, right? The book of John almost didn't make it into the pantheon because it was too Jewish, but Jesus Christ himself was a Jew. But you've taken all of the culture and essence out of a thing and kept the form for yourself. And this is not a knock on anybody else. A man has a right and a woman has a right to believe whatever they want to believe. But this is why people of the East look at the West the way they do, because they say when things come to the West, they lose their substance. They keep the form, but they lose the substance. So this is why people will say no yoga without Hinduism, no Hinduism without yoga. It's more so saying there is no yoga without how we do it. If you don't do it the way it was laid out by the ancients, you are not doing yoga. Again, you can look at the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali and look at the 8 limbs of yoga to see what the laws and the codes of being a yogi stood for. Celibacy, which is not necessarily no sex, but sex in a controlled environment or a lawful environment. Allah, the 10 Commandments says you shall not commit adultery. That's considered celibacy. Nonviolence. Nonviolence is not just to not harm a human being or harm an animal, which that is a part of it, but it really means to not commit injustice. So a person who stands by and watches another person beat his brother because he won't stop the person committing the foul act, he is committing an injustice and therefore is also playing a part in the violence. So violence, nonviolence, and celibacy, and all of these things, and not eating animals, not drinking alcohol. These are all part of the what it means to be a yogi. And when these laws are not adhered to, but you're doing the postures, it kind of makes the East look at us with a raised eyebrow.
Yoga is an Eastern occult practice rooted in paganism.
You do know that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are cults, right? By definition. And all 3 dabble in the occult by definition. This is the problem with Western minds. They're trying to comprehend Eastern thought, but you have to look at it from an Eastern perspective. If you're going to look at the East, you're looking from the outside in, and you don't know what you're looking at. So we're throwing around words like cult and occult, and we need to define them.
Hindus believe in many gods, like Krishna, Kali, and Shiva, to name a few. There are 6.
That's, again, it's not all forms of Hinduism are polytheistic. Some are monotheistic. The oldest forms of quote unquote Hinduism or Indian spirituality were monotheistic in practice. You would have to read the scriptures that the Indians wrote in order to understand that. You're not going to be able to Google that because it's been stamped on over the years that you're not going to get that. So it makes me go into like the definition of ignorance to ancient Indians. Ignorance is a superimposition of a falsehood on top of a truth. It's like layering falsehood on top of truth. And that's what's happened to Hinduism. In my opinion, that's what happened to yoga. In my opinion, that's what happened to Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. All have been had a cloud of smoke or ignorance placed on top of it.
6 major schools of thought, or darshanas, in Hinduism. Forgive my pronunciation. Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. Yoga. Okay,
so yoga is not a Hindu school of thought as far as like a religious school of thought like some of these other ones are. If you say Indian thought, then yes, it does come from Indian thought. Just as Judaism and Christianity spring from ancient Babylonian and Canaanite thought. You don't believe me? You just have to look at the Book of the Law and research Pesach, research Sukkot or Tabernacles, and a whole slew of the laws and traditions adapted and adjusted from the surrounding peoples. Even the rite, like the blood over the doorpost, the lamb's blood over the doorpost. If you look that up, if you look up like what hyssop was used for and why it was used in that situation, cedar wood, why that was used, the harvest, these festivals of harvest and stuff, they were well known throughout the land. It's just that the God of the Bible was gearing these well-known practices towards him and getting them away from, so to speak, quote unquote, other gods. So yes, they're a lot of what's practiced in the Bible, in the Torah, is not necessarily unique to that group of people. And this is just how religions evolve. They don't spring up out of nowhere like most people think. But the most influential schools of thoughts on the Indian people at the time of Patanjali Sutras, as well as the commentaries that followed, that were written based on Patanjali Sutras, the Sankhya group and the Vedanta group, uh, but if you read the Yoga Sutras, you'll see that there are places that yoga agrees with the Sankhyas and yoga agrees with the Vedanta groups, but then you'll see that they digress from it, and then you'll see in places where it totally does not agree with this group. So it shows you that it doesn't come out of this group. They were all influenced by the same type of thought process, but yoga stood on its own. Especially that seeing that yoga doesn't have like a patron deity, so to speak. It just has a kind of, it's like saying the creator, as I like to use online. I like to say the creator because that doesn't limit it to me saying Yahweh or whichever you call the Hebrew God, Jehovah. And it doesn't limit it to Buddha, because some people worship Buddha. And it doesn't limit it to like Allah, so to speak, because it kind of, these conjure thoughts of a certain paradigm or a certain religious system. So I like to say the creator because my posts are generally for people who believe that one entity created us all. It's what the Indians believed, and it's what yoga believed, that there's one creator that created us all. And they leave it at that. They don't call him, there's no talk of Shiva, there's no talk of Vishnu, there's no talk of any specific deity which were specific to certain regions, as we talked about Bengali Vaishnava, I'm butchering it too, which is the worshippers of Vishnu living in the city of Bengali. It's not like that, or Bengal, living in this city of Bengal. It's not like that. It's an overall generic creator of everything, and they leave it at that because they did not want to be religious. They really did not want to get into religious, and they took very good care in the Yoga Sutras not to deal with religion. So it's interesting that we have whole groups saying, especially Hindu groups, because they champion yoga. It was a great system that came out of India, so it's ours, is what these groups like to say. It's ours. If you have to say Shiva, like if with the word Hari Om. If you say Hari Om means like, Hari is like a dispeller, things that dispel unwanted things, so to speak. And Om is like the vibration that created the whole world. It's the sound or the syllable that created the whole world. So some people say, well, we won't say Hari Om because that's too generic, that's too inclusive. We say Hari Krishna because the people who worship Krishna now wanted to implement their deity into the mantra, when it really was about really yoga is not about that. They say Hari Krishna, they say Hari Vishnu, they say all different types of things. When you start getting into the religion,